You brought a stranger home? The question came from the doorway, just as 17-year-old Nessa Vale dropped the spoon she was holding. It struck the kitchen floor with a metallic clang. Nessa didn't bend to pick it up. She couldn't, because the man standing behind her was supposed to be asleep. 30 minutes earlier, she had found him curled beneath the stone archway of an abandoned railway station, soaked by freezing rain, wearing a torn coat and shoes so damaged that water had seeped through them. Now he stood inside the tiny apartment she had inherited from her grandmother, one hand gripping the doorframe. He looked exhausted, unshaven, hungry, homeless. At least, that was what Nessa believed. "You should be lying down," she said. The stranger glanced toward the battered sofa where she had arranged 2 blankets. "I heard voices. That's my neighbor." The elderly woman, standing in the doorway, stared at him suspiciously. "Nessa, come here. Mrs. Pell. Now." Nessa reluctantly stepped into the corridor. Mrs. Pell pulled the door almost closed. "Have you lost your mind? He needed help. He is a grown man you found on the street." "I know. You were 17. I also know that. You live alone." Nessa's expression tightened. "I know that too." Mrs. Pell immediately regretted the words. Nessa's parents had died when she was 9. Her grandmother, who raised her afterward, had died 7 months ago. Since then, Nessa had learned to survive on a small inheritance, weekend work at a bookbinding workshop, and a stubborn belief that needing help did not mean she was incapable. Mrs. Pell lowered her voice. "You have a good heart, but a good heart still needs good judgment. I couldn't leave him there. You could have called someone." "I tried." Nessa glanced toward the apartment. "The shelter is full. The emergency center said someone might come in 3 hours." He was shivering so badly he could barely speak. Mrs. Pell studied her. "You know nothing about him. I know he was cold. That is not enough." Nessa looked through the narrow opening in the door. The stranger had returned to the sofa. He sat with his head lowered, hands clasped together. For some reason, there was something strange about those hands. They were bruised, but not rough in the way Nessa expected from someone who had lived on the streets for years. And beneath his torn sleeve, she had briefly seen the edge of what looked like an expensive watch mark, a pale strip of skin where something had recently been removed. She had noticed. Nessa noticed everything. But she also remembered finding him beneath that railway arch. People had passed him. Some glanced. Some didn't. One man actually stepped around his legs without stopping. Nessa had walked 20 feet past him, then stopped, because 7 months earlier, while sitting alone outside a hospital room after her grandmother died, Nessa had learned something she would never forget. Being surrounded by people was not the same as having someone stop for you. So she turned around, and now a stranger was sleeping on her sofa. But before the sun rose, 6 black vehicles would surround her building. Men in expensive suits would fill the street. And Nessa would discover that the homeless man she had brought into her apartment was not homeless at all. He was Severin Arcos, a missing Mafia boss whose disappearance had put half the criminal underworld into panic. And somebody had almost killed him. If stories about unexpected kindness, hidden identities, and lives changed by one courageous decision are the reason you're here, subscribe to the channel and stay with this one. Because Nessa had no idea that helping one stranger would uncover a betrayal powerful man had spent months hiding. When Nessa returned to the apartment, the man looked up. "Your neighbor thinks I'm dangerous. She thinks everybody is dangerous." Smart woman. Nessa picked up the spoon. "I told her she could check on me every hour." The stranger frowned. "You shouldn't trust me." Nessa stopped. "Most dangerous people probably didn't warn you not to trust them." Then again, perhaps that was exactly what a dangerous person would say. She kept her distance. "I don't." He almost smiled. "Good." She placed a bowl of lentil stew on the table. "That doesn't mean you should freeze." The man stared at the food. Something changed in his expression. "When did you last eat?" Nessa asked. He didn't answer. "That long." He slowly sat at the table. Nessa pushed the bowl toward him. He ate carefully at first. Then hunger defeated manners. Nessa pretended not to notice. She washed dishes while he finished. "What's your name?" He paused. "Run." It wasn't entirely a lie. Severin had been called Run as a child. "Nessa, I heard your neighbor." "Of course you did." He finished eating. "Thank you. You already thanked me outside. I'm thanking you again." You can repay me by not stealing anything. His eyebrow rose. Nessa gestured around the tiny kitchen. Although if you find something valuable, tell me first. He laughed. It was the first time she heard it. Low, rusty, almost forgotten. You live here alone? Nessa's smile disappeared. Yes. Parents. Gone. He understood immediately and didn't ask how. She appreciated that. Family. My grandmother raised me. Where is she? Nessa looked toward the photograph beside the window. Severin followed her gaze. The answer was obvious. I'm sorry. 7 months. He nodded. No empty speech. No promise that grief disappeared. Just acknowledgement. Nessa liked him slightly more for that. She pointed toward the sofa. You sleep there. And you? Bedroom. Lock your door. She stared at him. You really are terrible at convincing people you're harmless. I'm not harmless. The words came quietly. Nessa's hand tightened around the dish towel. Severin noticed. But you are safe from me. She studied him. That's a strange sentence. I've had a strange week. What happened? His eyes changed. Something I should not involve you in. That answer made Nessa even more curious. But she remembered Mrs. Pell's warning. Good heart. Good judgment. Fine. She walked toward her bedroom. Then turned. There are clean clothes in the bathroom. They belong to my grandfather. They might fit. Severin looked toward the hallway. You kept them. Grandmother couldn't throw them away. And you? Nessa shrugged. I guess I couldn't either. She hesitated. Bathroom window doesn't open. Front door squeaks. Mrs. Pell is probably sitting outside with a frying pan. Severin almost smiled again. You have planned my escape routes poorly. Exactly. Nessa entered her bedroom and locked the door. Severin remained at the table. For several minutes, he listened to the apartment. Old pipes. Rain against glass. A clock ticking. Somewhere upstairs, a television played too loudly. Ordinary sounds. He had almost forgotten what ordinary life sounded like. 48 hours earlier, Severin Arcos had been sitting at the head of a 12-seat table inside a fortified country residence. His organization controlled illegal operations, but Severin had spent years pulling the family away from indiscriminate violence and expanding legitimate shipping, security, and construction businesses. That change created enemies. Some outside, some inside. 2 nights earlier, one of those enemies made his move. A meeting had been arranged at an isolated hunting property. Only 5 people knew Severin would be there. He arrived with trusted security. Then the lights went out. Shots were fired. Severin escaped through woodland after his vehicle was disabled. He lost his phone. His coat was torn crossing a fence. He injured his shoulder falling down an embankment. By dawn, he understood something worse than the attack itself. Someone close to him had betrayed his location. So he disappeared. No hospitals. No police. No calls. Not until he knew who had sold him out. For 2 days, Severin moved through places nobody would expect to find him. Then exhaustion won, and a teenage girl carrying groceries stopped beneath an abandoned railway arch. Sir, he remembered opening his eyes. A small figure stood beneath a yellow umbrella. You're soaked. He almost laughed. Obviously. Can you stand? He told her to leave. She didn't. He warned her twice. She disappeared. Severin assumed she had listened. 10 minutes later, she returned carrying hot tea, a cheap rain poncho, and a first aid kit. I'm not taking you anywhere, she said. But you can stop turning blue. He stared at her. What? Why what? Why are you helping me? Nessa seemed confused by the question. Because you're here. That answer stayed with him. Because you're here. Not because she recognized him. Not because she expected payment. Not because she feared him. She didn't know who Severin Arcos was. To Nessa, he was simply a man nobody else had stopped for. Now, sitting in her kitchen, Severin looked at the photograph of Nessa and her grandmother. Then he noticed something else. Bills. Several were overdue. 1 envelope from her school. Another from the building manager. A handwritten budget sat beneath a magnet on the refrigerator. Rent. Electricity. Groceries. School transport. Every amount carefully calculated. Nessa had given him half a loaf of bread when she could barely afford another. Severin looked toward her bedroom door. People with millions had betrayed him for more. A girl with almost nothing had shared what little she possessed. At 2:17 a.m., Nessa woke to a crash. She sat upright. Another sound. From the kitchen. She unlocked her door, but did not open it. Run. No answer. Run. She grabbed the heavy flashlight beside her bed. Slowly opened the door. Severin was kneeling beside the table. One hand pressed against his shoulder. His face had gone pale. Nessa hurried forward, then stopped herself. What's wrong? Nothing. You were literally on the floor. Old injury. From what? Silence. Nessa noticed blood soaking through the borrowed shirt. Her eyes widened. That wasn't there before. It reopened. You told me you fell. I did. That is not a fall. Severin looked down. Nessa's voice became firmer. What happened to you? He couldn't tell her. But lying now seemed insulting. Someone tried to hurt me. Nessa stepped backward. Why? Because of who I am. Who are you? Severin stared at her. Before he could answer, headlights swept across the curtains. One vehicle, then another, then another. Severin stood immediately despite the pain. His entire posture changed. The exhausted stranger disappeared. His eyes sharpened. Turn off the lights. Nessa froze. Now. She obeyed. Severin moved toward the window without exposing himself. Below, 3 dark vehicles had stopped across the street. Nessa whispered, Are those your friends? I don't know. That was not reassuring. Mrs. Pell's door opened in the hallway. Nessa immediately moved toward it. Severin caught her wrist. Don't. My neighbor. If they're hostile, opening that door exposes both of you. Nessa stared at his hand. Severin released her immediately. Sorry. A car door opened outside. Then another. Men stepped onto the pavement. Severin recognized the first one. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Friends, Nessa whispered. This one is... He opened the apartment door. Mrs. Pell stood outside wearing a robe and holding, exactly as Nessa predicted, a frying pan. What is happening? Stay inside, Severin said. Mrs. Pell raised the pan. Don't order me around in my own hallway. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. 3 men appeared. The first stopped when he saw Severin. He looked as though he had just found someone returned from the dead. Boss. Nessa blinked. Boss. The man rushed forward. Thank God. Severin's expression hardened. Lower your voice, Odrin. The man immediately obeyed. Behind him stood 2 others. Expensive suits. Earpieces. One carried a medical bag. Nessa looked from them to Severin, then toward the street. More vehicles had arrived. Mrs. Pell slowly lowered the frying pan. Nessa whispered, Who exactly did I bring home? Severin looked at her. There was no useful way to soften it. My name is Severin Arcos. Nothing. Nessa shrugged. Should that mean something? Odrin almost laughed from sheer relief. Severin didn't. It means I wasn't honest with you. Clearly, I own Arcos Freight. Nessa had heard of that. Everyone had. One of the largest private logistics companies in the region. Her mouth opened slightly. And several other businesses. Nessa stared at the borrowed shirt. Then at the sofa. You own Arcos Freight? Yes. You ate my last yogurt. Severin blinked. Odrin turned away to hide a smile. Legitimate shipping, security, and construction businesses. Nessa pointed at him. That was supposed to be breakfast. I apologize. You're rich. Considerably. And you ate the yogurt? Mrs. Pell began laughing. The tension broke for exactly 3 seconds. Then Odrin spoke. Sir, we need to move. Severin's expression changed. Who knew? Odrin understood immediately. For people besides me. Names. Odrin glanced at Nessa. Severin nodded. Speak. Lucan Drex. Pedersorn. Visek Hall. And your cousin, Marrow. Severin went completely still. Nessa knew nothing about these men, but she understood the reaction to the last name. You think one of them betrayed you, she said. Severin looked at her. Yes. Odrin stared at him. You told her? She figured it out. Nessa folded her arms. You're not very mysterious when people are shooting at you. The doctor examined Severin's shoulder. The wound was painful, but not immediately life-threatening. While he worked, Nessa sat across the room. Everything suddenly felt absurd. The stranger she had worried might steal her toaster apparently owned buildings taller than her entire block. Then Severin noticed Odrin looking around the apartment. Not judging. Assessing. He leaned closer. Have someone stay outside this building. Odrin nodded. Nessa heard. No. Severin looked at her. No. I don't want armed men outside my home. You may have been seen with me. That is your problem. It became yours when you helped me. Nessa's expression hardened. I didn't agree to that. Severin fell silent. She was right. He had spent his life making decisions and expecting compliance. Nessa owed him none. What would make you comfortable? The question surprised her. Police. Complicated. Why? Severin exchanged a look with Odrin. Nessa sighed. Right. Mafia. Mrs. Pell nearly dropped her frying pan. Mafia. Nessa winced. I probably should have whispered that. Mrs. Pell pointed the pan at Severin. You brought organized crime in my building? Severin, feared by men twice Mrs. Pell's size, looked genuinely uncertain how to answer. I did not intentionally. Ow. Nessa stared. Mrs. Pell. Not you. Him. Odrin coughed. Severin stood. She is correct. Nessa looked at him. You're leaving? I should never have stayed. You could barely stand. And you helped me. He looked around the tiny apartment. I will make certain that kindness costs you nothing. Nessa immediately shook her head. I don't want money. I didn't say money. You were thinking money. Severin almost smiled. You noticed too much. So I've been told. He returned the borrowed coat, folded carefully, then paused at the doorway. Thank you, Nessa. For the yogurt? For stopping. Something in his voice changed the room. Nessa understood. He wasn't thanking her for food, or blankets, or clothing. He was thanking her because when everyone else passed him beneath that archway, she hadn't. You look like you needed somebody, she said. Severin nodded. I did. By sunrise, the vehicles were gone. The street returned to normal. Almost. Nessa stood at her window holding a mug of tea. Mrs. Pell entered without knocking. You are never doing that again. Nessa nodded. Agreed. Promise. I promise not to unknowingly shelter another mafia boss. Nessa. Fine. No strangers. Mrs. Pell sat down. Was he dangerous? Nessa thought about it. Yes. Were you afraid? Eventually. Mrs. Pell touched her hand. You were allowed to help people without carrying them home. I know. It was an important lesson. Compassion did not require abandoning caution. Nessa understood that now. What she didn't understand was why Severin's disappearance from her apartment felt strangely like losing something. Not romance. Not fantasy. Something simpler. For one night, two lonely people had shared a kitchen. One had lost almost everyone. The other no longer knew whom he could trust. Neither knew the other's whole story. Maybe that was why honesty had appeared in unexpected places. 3 days passed. Then 4. Nessa returned to school. Worked Saturday at the bindery. Paid the electricity bill. Life continued. Until she discovered an envelope beneath her door. No stamp. Inside was a note. The yogurt debt remains unpaid. Nessa laughed despite herself. Below was an address. And a time. Nothing else. Mrs. Pell immediately said no. Nessa agreed. Then the doorbell rang. A woman in her 60s stood downstairs. Elegant. Silver-haired. 2 security officers waited near the curb. My name is Avella Arcos. Nessa stared. Severin's mother? The woman smiled. He told me you were quick. Nessa folded her arms. If this is about money, it isn't. Jobs? No. Scholarship? Avella laughed. He also told me you were stubborn. People keep saying that. Avella's smile faded. My son asked you to come because he discovered who betrayed him. That changed everything. Nessa hesitated. What does that have to do with me? More than we hoped. The attack on Severin had not been random. His cousin Mero had been leaking information for months. But investigators discovered something else. Mero had used several charities and youth housing organizations to move money through fraudulent contracts. One organization was the foundation that owned Nessa's apartment building. Her grandmother had fought them before her death. Nessa remembered the letters. Complaints about unexplained fees. Repairs that never happened. Threats of eviction. Her grandmother had kept everything. Boxes of records. Receipts. Correspondence. Nessa had almost thrown them away. She hadn't. Avella explained carefully. Your grandmother may have documented evidence connecting the foundation to Mero's companies. Nessa stared at her. So that's why you want me. Avella shook her head. No. That's why lawyers want to speak with you. A pause. My son wants to see you because he has spent 4 days asking whether you are safe. Nessa looked away. That evening, she entered the Arco's residence for the first time. Not a glittering palace. Not what she expected. The property was an old stone manor surrounded by woodland, heavily secured but surprisingly quiet. Severin stood in the library. Clean-shaven now, dark suit, shoulder bandaged beneath his shirt. He looked nothing like the man beneath the railway arch, and somehow exactly like him. Nessa stopped. You look expensive. Severin smiled. You look disappointed. A little. He gestured toward a tray. Yogurt. 6 containers. Nessa stared. You're ridiculous. I pay my debts. Apparently with interest. They both laughed. Then Severin became serious. I owe you an apology. For lying? Yes. You were hiding from someone trying to kill you. That does complicate introductions. Just slightly. He looked at her. But I also brought danger close to your home. You didn't choose where I took you. No. Then stop taking responsibility for decisions I made. Severin stared. People rarely told him to stop taking responsibility. Most of them tried giving him more. Nessa continued. I should have called emergency services and waited somewhere public instead of bringing you home. Yes. But I'm still glad I stopped. Severin nodded. So am I. Nessa brought her grandmother's records. They proved more useful than anyone expected. Her grandmother had spent years documenting suspicious charges imposed on tenants. Dates, company names, account numbers, copies of notices. One company connected directly to Marrow. The information helped investigators unravel a wider fraud involving housing funds. For Nessa, the discovery changed how she remembered her grandmother. She had always thought the old woman simply kept too much paperwork. Now she realized she had been fighting quietly for dozens of families. Severin refused to let the evidence disappear. But he also refused to turn Nessa into a public spectacle. Attorneys handled the documents. Investigators handled the case. Nessa returned to school. Months passed. Marrow was eventually prosecuted for crimes connected to fraud and conspiracy surrounding the attack on Severin. Other people faced charges according to the evidence against them. Severin survived something harder, learning that family and loyalty were not the same thing. One evening, Nessa found him sitting alone on a bench outside the courthouse after giving evidence. No entourage beside him. She sat at the opposite end. You look homeless again. He looked at his expensive coat. This coat costs more than your building. That doesn't make the expression less homeless. He laughed. Then silence. Finally he said, I grew up with Marrow. Nessa waited. I trusted him. I know. He knew things about me nobody else knew. Nessa looked ahead. Grandmother used to say betrayal hurts because strangers don't know where to aim. Severin absorbed that. She sounds formidable. She once chased a landlord down 3 flights of stairs with a broom. I would have liked her. She would have interrogated you. I would have survived. Nessa looked at him. Debatable. He smiled. Then his expression softened. You remind me of her. Sometimes. That explains the stubbornness. Nessa nudged his shoe with hers. Severin became serious again. You know what bothered me most about that night? The attack. No. The railway station. She frowned. Hundreds of people passed. I counted 43 before you stopped. Nessa looked at him. You counted. I needed something to focus on. 43 people? Yes. And then me. And then you. He looked toward the courthouse steps. I had spent years believing people helped because they wanted something. Then a girl with overdue electricity bills bought me tea. Nessa looked embarrassed. You saw those. They were on the refrigerator. Privacy exists. So do magnets. She rolled her eyes. Severin continued. You didn't know my name? No. You didn't know whether I could repay you? No. You helped anyway. Nessa shook her head. Don't turn me into a saint. I'm not. Good. It was reckless. Thank you. Also compassionate. That sounds better. Severin smiled. You taught me something. What? That kindness means more when the recipient has nothing to offer. Nessa considered it, then shook her head. I disagree. Severin raised an eyebrow. You had something to offer. What? You needed help. He stared at her. Nessa continued. Sometimes giving somebody a chance to be decent is something too. Severin looked away. For a man accustomed to having answers, she left him without one surprisingly often. A year later, Nessa turned 18. She graduated near the top of her class. The fraudulent housing foundation lost control of several properties. A legitimate nonprofit purchased Nessa's building and renovated it without displacing the tenants. Mrs. Pell received a new kitchen. She complained the cabinets were the wrong shade. Everyone celebrated. Nessa began studying conservation and book restoration while continuing work at the bindery. Severin offered to pay tuition once. Exactly once. Nessa said no. Exactly once. He respected it. Instead, Avella helped Nessa find scholarships she qualified for on her own merits. That, Nessa accepted. Severin also changed. He continued expanding his legitimate companies while distancing himself further from the criminal structures he had inherited. It wasn't simple. Power built over generations did not disappear because one man suddenly developed a conscience. But he began making choices differently, more carefully, less violently. The betrayal had taught him that fear created obedience but not loyalty. Nessa had taught him that loyalty sometimes appeared where power had no reason to expect it. On the second anniversary of the night they met, Severin returned to the abandoned railway station. It had been renovated, the arches cleaned, lights repaired. A community night shelter now operated in the former ticket hall. Nessa arrived carrying 2 coffees. "You're late." Severin looked at his watch. 3 minutes. Unacceptable. She handed him a cup. They stood beneath the same stone archway. "You remember exactly where?" she asked. Severin pointed. "There. You look terrible. I was having a difficult week. You smelled terrible too." That detail could have remained forgotten. Nessa laughed. Inside the shelter, volunteers prepared beds. Severin had funded part of the renovation anonymously. Nessa discovered it anyway. She always discovered things. "Why here?" she asked. He looked through the open doors. "Because nobody should have to depend on a reckless 17-year-old finding them." Nessa smiled. "That is probably sensible." He looked at her. "Do you regret taking me home?" She thought carefully. "I regret not being safer." "Good. I should have found a public place, stayed with other adults, and contacted proper services." "Definitely. But do I regret stopping?" She shook her head. "Never." Severin nodded. Neither romanticized what happened. Nessa had taken a genuine risk. Kindness did not require ignoring danger. That became part of the story too. Helping wisely mattered. But so did refusing to become indifferent. Years later, people who heard how Nessa and Severin met usually focused on the shocking part. The orphan girl, the homeless stranger, the morning revelation, the mafia boss. But Nessa never believed that was the important part. The important part happened before she knew his name, before the black vehicles, before the expensive suit, before the security officers called him boss. A man sat beneath an archway while rain soaked through his clothes. People passed. A girl passed too. Then she stopped. That was the moment everything changed. Not because the man secretly possessed wealth. Not because helping him eventually connected Nessa to powerful people. Had Severin truly been homeless, Nessa's compassion would have mattered exactly the same. That was something Severin himself insisted people understand. Her kindness did not become valuable because he turned out to be important. He had been important while everyone believed he was nobody. One winter evening, Nessa attended the shelter's anniversary dinner. Former residents returned. Volunteers cooked. Mrs. Pell somehow became responsible for desserts despite nobody remembering appointing her. Avella sat with families near the fireplace. Severin arrived late. Nessa handed him an apron. He stared at it. "What is this?" "You're serving soup. I funded half this building." "Congratulations." She pushed the apron into his hands. "Soup." Severin looked around for assistance. Nobody helped. Avella smiled into her tea. Mrs. Pell pointed toward the kitchen. "You heard the girl." Severin sighed. One of the most feared men in the region tied on an apron and began carrying bowls. Nessa watched from across the room. For a moment, she remembered the stranger sitting at her tiny kitchen table. Wet hair, bruised hands, borrowed shirt, eating lentil stew as though it were the finest meal in the world. He caught her staring. What? Nothing. You're smiling. I was remembering my yogurt. Severin groaned. Years have passed. Some debts are eternal. Later, when everyone had gone, Nessa and Severin stood beneath the shelter entrance. Snow had begun falling. You know, Severin said, I never told you what I thought when you first came back with that tea. Nessa looked at him. What? I thought you wanted something. That is depressing. It was realistic. What did you think I wanted? Money eventually. A favor. Something. And when did you realize I didn't? Severin smiled. When you made me sleep on a sofa with a broken spring. Nessa laughed. It wasn't broken. It absolutely was. You survived. Barely. She looked toward the street. People hurried through the snow. Somewhere in the distance, bells rang. Severin became quiet. 43. Nessa knew immediately what he meant. The people who had passed. Do you still remember? Yes. She looked at him. Maybe some were afraid. Probably. Maybe some didn't see you. Possible. Maybe some didn't know what to do. Yes. Nessa pulled her coat tighter. So don't hate them. I don't. What do you feel? Severin considered it. Grateful that number 44 turned around. Nessa smiled. And that became the part of their story neither forgot. You cannot always save a stranger. You should not put yourself in danger to prove you are kind. Sometimes the wisest help is calling professionals, staying in a safe public place, or finding another trusted adult. But you can notice. You can care. You can refuse to believe that someone's circumstances determine their worth. Because the person sleeping beneath the bridge may never turn out to be wealthy. The woman asking for help may never repay you. The lonely child may never become famous. The elderly stranger may have no powerful family coming for them. And none of that should be required before their humanity matters. Nessa helped Severin before he became Severin Arcos in her eyes. To her, he was simply Ren, a coal man, a hungry man, a person who needed someone to stop. By morning, she discovered he was a mafia boss. But Severin discovered something far more important. Before morning ever came, someone had treated him like a human being when she believed he was nobody. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about hidden identities, courage, unexpected kindness, and choices that change lives. Now tell me in the comments, what was your favorite moment? Was it when Nessa brought the freezing stranger home without knowing who he really was? Was it the morning the black vehicles surrounded her building and she discovered the homeless man sleeping on her sofa was actually Severin Arcos? Or was it the moment years later when Severin admitted that 43 people had walked past him before Nessa became number 44 and turned around? If you enjoyed the story, like the video and share it with someone who would appreciate its message. Because sometimes the biggest surprise isn't discovering that the stranger you helped was secretly powerful. Sometimes it is discovering that kindness was powerful before you knew who the stranger was.